fracture!
The flesh melts!
We become one! Burst!
Forth!
Roots coil!
Branches fracture!
Death!
Unrelenting.
Rend!
Awesome.
Another failure!
Another iteration!
Mortal flesh is so valuable. Grasp your mortality tightly. Emerge of my light.
I shall free you.
Resist the assault.
Greetings, Exile. In the last update, I promised you a walking simulator, and as you can see, I've delivered. Now, all you have to do is walk, and everything around you melts and explodes in satisfying icy explosions. But that's not all. I've made massive improvements to the build across the board in terms of damage, defense, and even utility. I've also found a way to fix one of the build's biggest downsides, its clunkiness during boss fights. And the best part? All of this comes on a budget. Now we've got a lot to cover in this update, so let's get started. Let's start with the improvements I mentioned in the previous update. The first major issue was relying on purity of elements for ailment immunity. But that's finally gone. I've replaced it with malevolence, which gives us a solid boost in damage. To make that possible, I had to hit 100% ailment avoidance through other sources. Here's how I did it. I got 20% from the Shield Mastery, another 20 from Crystal Skin, 20 more from Elegant Form, 12% by taking Thick Skin, and the remaining from a modifier on the shield. If you don't want to go through all these steps, you can also just use a Storm Shroud unique jewel. But keep in mind, those can be pretty expensive. Next, let's talk about the improvements to our defenses. Previously, whenever we got hit by something that wasn't blocked, it usually meant instant death. But now things are completely different. On top of having 5 endurance charges, I've stacked a ton of evasion and armor across most of my gear. And all that evasion gets converted into even more armor thanks to the Iron Reflexes keystone. Right now, I'm sitting at around 20,000 armor with 5 endurance charges, which gives about 87% physical damage reduction against smaller hits. That takes care of attack hits, but what about spells? For that, I've added spell suppression to the build, and with lucky suppression, we're sitting at roughly 65% spell suppression chance. And lastly, for damage over time, the bane of most block builds, we've got 2 layers of defense. Soul of Arakali as our major god for 10% reduced damage over time taken, and the damage over time mastery for another 10% less damage taken over time. Next, let's talk about the improvements I've made to our offensive capabilities. Starting with gear, as I mentioned in the previous update, I've added Venopuncture and Tempest Rising to the build. The combination of these 2 uniques allows us to aggravate bleeding, completely removing the need for jagged technique. This change opens the door for the Trial Master Ascendancy, letting us become the Priest of Yaumak. This node reduces the soul requirement for Vale Earthquake, gives a chance to regain all the used souls, and even grants 1 soul gained per second from the small node leading to it. When combined with Rune Graft of Soul Wick, we get 2 souls per second, passively, meaning Vale Earthquake now has almost no downtime and can be used as your main clear skill all the time. Now, if you're playing in SSF, I wouldn't recommend making this switch. Even without Priest of Yaumak, Vale Earthquake already has solid uptime. But if you still want to make the change, there's a workaround, though it's a little clunky. You can roll Chance to Aggravate Bleeding as an Eater of Worlds implicit on your gloves, which can go as high as 30%. Combine that with the 10% from the Bloodletting node, and you'll have 40% total chance to aggravate bleeding. And since Vile Earthquake hits rapidly while you move, you'll still be able to aggravate bleeding quite easily. Those were the improvements to our gear. Now let's talk about our gems. Starting with the removal of vulnerability from the setup, since we now have a ring that automatically inflicts vulnerability on hit, we no longer need to manually cast it. As I mentioned before, Vile Earthquake is now our main clear skill. We don't use the regular Earthquake anymore, just the Vile version. It's now linked with less duration and increased area of effect support for faster, smoother clears. The biggest change, though, is in our main damage setup. Crushing Fist is no longer part of the primary damage links. It's now a utility setup used only to generate Fortify and Maim enemies. So it's linked with Fortify, Maim, and Expert Retaliation. This frees up a support slot on Eviscerate, letting us add Hypothermia support since we now chill enemies through the Venopuncture ring. Also, Cruelty support has been replaced with Deadly Ailments, since we're not able to maintain maximum cruelty effect right now, so it's simply more efficient. And if you don't want to use Venopuncture to apply chill, you can just reserve a bit of mana and run Skitterbots instead. They'll handle chilling and even shocking enemies for you. Now that we've covered the improvements to our gear and gems, let's talk about the skill tree. First, I've added several cluster jewels to the setup. We're using an 8 passive large cluster jewel with Battle Hardened, Master the Fundamentals, and 1 extra notable that we're skipping as we're just taking the jewel sockets from it. Then we have a medium cluster jewel with Wound Aggravation and Student of Decay. For the small clusters, one has Exploit Weakness, which gives a huge boost to sustain while mapping, and the other has Elegant Form, which adds both spell suppression and ailment immunity chance. I've also added a Flesh and Flame combo to allocate Inspirational from the Champion Ascendancy, which gives a nice damage boost to both Malevolence and Pride auras. I chose these specifically because they were the cheapest options on trade, making them ideal for a budget version of the build. Now, if you're playing in SSF, finding these uniques can be nearly impossible. So in that case, I recommend using rare jewels with modifiers like Increased Global Physical Damage, Physical Damage over Time Multiplier, or Increased Bleeding Damage instead. Now that you've seen all the improvements, let's talk about the biggest downside of this build, its clunkiness during boss fights. Having to constantly block to deal damage doesn't feel great, especially against bosses like Shaper, who mostly deals damage over time and has tons of one-shot mechanics you definitely don't want to test your luck against. To fix this, I've got 2 solutions, one for Trade League and one for SSF. Let's start with the Trade League solution. In 3.27, we got a new unique shield called Bitter Instinct, which makes retaliation skills available every 4 seconds without needing to block. Sounds amazing, right? Well, not entirely. The shield stats are pretty awful, so you probably won't want to use it full time. But don't worry, you don't have to. You can place Bitter Instinct and a weapon compatible with your retaliation skill in your weapon swap. Then, whenever you're about to enter a boss arena, or face a long attack sequence where you don't want to block, you can swap to that setup. Once your retaliation skill becomes active, switch back to your main setup and fire it off instantly. Just make sure to get one with the highest retaliation skills become usable longer roll, since that's the only modifier that carries over after swapping. It might take a bit of practice to get the timing right, but once you do, it feels surprisingly smooth. Even for me, and this is literally the first time I've ever used weapon swap for something other than leveling gems. Now for the SSF solution. You can farm a ring called Hateful Accuser by doing rituals. This ring grants penance mark, and when you mark an enemy, it summons 3 phantasms that attack you. Their hits deal almost no damage and are super easy to block. This helps you maintain lucky block uptime and constantly triggers your retaliation skills without putting you in danger. Hopefully, these solutions help anyone who found the build a bit frustrating because of its clunkiness during boss fights. I haven't covered everything in this video, so if you want a more detailed version, check out my Mobalytics guide. And if you're following the build, make sure to favorite it too. Now, before we wrap up, let's talk about what's coming next. In the next update, I'll be bringing you the fully min-maxed version of this build, along with a complete guide and showcase explaining everything in even more detail. It might take about a week to get it done, but don't worry. You can expect a crafting video during that time covering some of the build's gear. If you enjoy off-meta builds like this, make sure to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell to stay updated. And if you want to stay even more connected, you can join our Discord server or catch me live on Twitch. I'll be streaming almost daily. As always, thanks for watching, Exile.